We are the Keyboard Samurai, a podcast focused on sharing insights to help those working in cybersecurity companies, be them technology or services. Each session, your host, Will Klusovsky, aka Will Klu, sits down with professionals in our industry to illuminate topics that will help your security biz, team, or self be better. Let's hack into it now. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting and thrilling episode. Today I am joined by Lauren. Lauren, why don't you give us the 20, 30 seconds of who you are and why we care?
All right. Thanks, Will. I really appreciate you having me on. My name is Lauren Zabierek. I am the current Senior Vice President for the Future of Digital Security at the Institute for Security and Technology. But more importantly, I have over 20 years, really 22 years to be exact, of experience in national security. And that's between the U.S. military, the intelligence community, private sector, academia, and then senior federal roles. And, really what I am coming to this sort of problem, right, is really as a citizen, as a human, and as a mom who is deeply committed to building a more secure and safer future.
That's outstanding. So I love that aspect of things. And I know we talked, it was funny because you and I talked before this in our little prep call about what is secure by design. And, I kind of have those similar backgrounds. We come from the non-hackery world of policies, programs, and intelligence and things like that. So, we have a different view on things. So I think this should be good for the listeners, viewers of this. So when we talk about secure by design, like what is it? What does it mean? Like when you explain that to someone in security or otherwise, like how do you explain that?
Well, let's first start with kind of defining the problem. And the problem as we see it, and I say we, my colleague Bob Lord and I, who continue to lead this work at IST, is that first, our entire society, right, our security, our economy, our public health, it's all run on software. And with very few exceptions, that software is built insecurely with unsafe defaults, delivered, with unsafe components. And the cyber attacks that we see and the outages that we see are a result of that. But the root of that unsafety is really the misaligned incentives that really shape the actions of the software companies. Now, the good news is that we generally know how to fix this. We know how to make it better. And really, we just need to look to other industries and their safety norms for clues on how to get there. And so secure by design at its core is really this idea of shifting incentives to change behavior. Where it came from is the National Cybersecurity Strategy. If you go back and read that in 2023, I believe it was Pillar 3 talked about shifting the responsibility for security from the most vulnerable. So your hospitals, your water utilities, your small and medium businesses in critical infrastructure that are really on the front lines. So shifting the responsibility for security back to the manufacturers. And so in 2023, in April specifically, Secure by Design at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was born. And then in the summer, Bob and I departed CISA and we went to IST, which is a critical action think tank, to continue that work there.
That's interesting. So 2023, because I recall, and this may be different, right, is probably in the 2015s or so, like around that time frame. Like from a consulting standpoint, we were selling Secure by Design, which was it was more about the business thinking about security as part of the design. So, and again, we're working with manufacturers, with software developers, so it's similarly part of that. It's not necessarily that different, I think, but the idea of if you're going to create something, if you're going to build something, think about security first. I mean, we do it today even with processes, right? Like everybody I advise, if you've got a procurement department, you need to have security built into it, right? But you talked about we know how to do it. And I jokingly say, I don't think we've ever taught developers how to code securely. And they've all learned, they've all learned how to code insecurely or unsecure. Is it insecure or unsecured?
I'm going to say insecurely.
Insecurely. It makes me feel insecure.
Right, exactly. Is that the same? Yeah.
Yeah. So we never really taught them how to code securely, and now AI has learned from their code. So the ideas. So I guess what are the steps, the process that you guys kind of thought about that? Okay, so I've got a company who's developing software or who is going to be on the front lines. Like, what do I need to be doing to make sure I am secure by design?
Well, I did want to just quickly pull on the thread that you mentioned before, which is that you've been talking about secure by design for a long time, and we know this. We know this is not a new concept, and we certainly stand on the shoulders of the visionaries that have come before us. But I think what is new is the fact that the United States government, and then of course other governments too. If you saw our white papers that we produced while at CISA, you'll see that there are a lot of other nations that co-sealed those papers. And so them getting in on this and driving this from a national policy perspective, I think that's what's new. And so, asking, what are the things that developers should do? I think there's a lot of different technical things that we could explore, and I would direct people at a very minimum to the pledge, for instance. So in 2024, we released a Secure by Design pledge at CISA, and we released it at RSA in 2024, and initially we had 68 software companies sign up for it. By the spring of 2025, we had over 300. And I think that was pretty remarkable. And I know that there have been some, critiques of the pledge, and I think that's fair. But I think what people should take away from it is it shows us what's possible. And the pledge itself wasn't just, we pledged to make more secure software and that was it, right? It actually outlines 7 concrete actions that software manufacturers should be taking and should be working toward over the course of the year of that signing. So for instance, we talked about enabling multi-factor authentication by default across all product lines. We talked about working on eliminating entire classes of vulnerability. We talked about establishing a vulnerability disclosure policy and working towards complete and accurate, timely CVE records, for example. So those are just some of the pledge items that we talked about. But ultimately, if we take a step back and we think about secure by design and the principles, they're not exactly technical. So the first principle is to take responsibility for your customers' security outcomes. The second is to embrace radical transparency and accountability. And the third one is to lead from the top. And so you'll see that this is a lot more organizational and cultural and really focused on the business and the company leadership and not necessarily the developers themselves. In a lot of conversations that we've had with individual developers, we know that there's a desire to want to make better products. It's just that the companies really need to align the incentives within the company. And then, of course, we need to look at the incentives for the companies writ large.
Right. How many lawyers got ticked off at all of that?
I cannot confirm nor deny any lawyer feelings in the development of the pledge.
Radical transparency and taking the account. I don't think accountability is not the word used, but accountability for other people's security, which is it makes sense. At the end of the day, if you're creating a product, it's on you. Especially if you're selling something to critical infrastructure or small medium business who's not going to like one IT person, right? Stuff like that. And I know, like we saw improvements from like PCI when it first came out, kind of directing people like, first the mom and pops were responsible for everything, and then the processors realized, well, we'll just encrypt everything end to end and make it really easy for you, right?
Sure.
So I guess are there things like that we see coming? To oversimplify a little bit?
Well, I think we see a lot of different technical approaches that people are developing. So for instance, Jack Cable, who was one of the three of us at CISA leading Secure by Design, he has since moved on, and he founded a startup that is really geared towards helping developers build securely by design. So there are certain things on that end. But as far as, what is coming from a policy perspective, I think there's a lot more discussion that we need to have. And our work at IST is really focused on that discussion, especially with more stakeholders, with more industry. And by industry, we're talking about the software manufacturers as well as the customers of software. So how do we continue to drive adoption and change those incentives? How can we strengthen the institutions around Secure by Design? So at the top, you sort of mentioned, okay, well, we don't teach developers how to code securely, right? Well, how can we do that? What are the levers that we can pull in order to make those changes? Can we talk to the universities and provide incentives there? Right, because at the end of the day, I think I mentioned this earlier, it's all about shifting the incentives to change the behavior. What are the different levers to do that? And in that same vein, another aspect is really getting into the economics of security, and how to measure insecurity, right? And other data that is associated. And then we also want to continue to drive this globally. So we really want to coordinate across the world and really be the hub for this activity.
That's cool. Is this something that is this, you've got two sides of the world from a regulatory standpoint, right? We've got something like CMMC that says, hey, if you want to do business, you have to do this. And then we've got things like NIST that says, hey, if you get this stamp of approval, we know you're really doing good things. And it's, where, in the CMMC world, if you want to do the business, you have to. And in the NIST world, it's like, well, or I'll say 27001 world anyway, if you've got that stamp, it's just a differentiator. So is this something, is it an either or is it one way? Like we talk about those different ways you can influence that. Is it influencing through regulations, through grants, through, like how do you envision that these great ideas actually get applied and happen?
Yeah, there's a couple different things that you mentioned here. So some of those frameworks and those certifications, for instance, some of those we look at as being a little bit more process-based versus outcome-based. And we'd like to get things more on the latter, right? So outcomes-based. What does your product actually do? How does it behave in certain environments? Not just, oh, I followed this checklist, right? So I should get certified. So that's one thing. Another thing is, you're talking about in order to sell within the government, right? Do you get this certification or not? And I think what we're really talking about here is demand, right? And procurement, right? So what could, say, the federal government do in order to drive or to generate that demand signal to the software companies to say, these are the expectations that we have of your product, right? What are the quality indicators, right? The security indicators, what does that look like? It's not just the job of the federal government, though. We can look at the different state governments, we can look at industry customers, we can look at small and medium businesses. And we hear a lot that, well, our customers don't really demand security. I suspect that there's demand, but it's kind of a diffuse signal. And so
They assume it.
Yeah, maybe I think you're right. There's
Something I
an
shouldn't have to
assumption.
demand. I don't buy a car and go, does it have seatbelts? You assume it's there.
Yeah, well, I love that you brought that up, and I'd love to get into, public safety and how we've made other industries safe here in a few minutes. But yeah, I think you're right. There's an assumption that there is security built in, but also I think there's sort of a lack of knowing, well, how do I tell a company? What do I want? What should I be asking for? And so some of the work that we did at CISA was really on this idea of secure by demand. And that's something that we'd like to continue to help develop things like playbooks and, really working with specific stakeholder groups to really sharpen that demand signal.
Is that a role of GRC, procurement, somebody else, compliance?
We look at that as a procurement role. So it's definitely across the organization, right? It's not just security, and not just procurement either, right? I think there needs to be some cross collaboration.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I worked with quite a few state governments in my life, and it's getting to the point now where they're trying to streamline because it takes so long. That basically there's many, I won't name any names, that are just like, if you have a SOC 2, you're good. Like that's all you need to be an approved vendor. Where I feel like something like this is probably more better. I'm just gonna say because again, you're coming outcome based. It's not this checklist that we made and we assess the specific environment and you have a report. It's not a certification, right? So it's pretty intriguing to me, right? The outcome based side of it versus the certification side, so to speak.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's something to pull the thread on as we go forward.
Right. So how does that? I guess where are things today? What kind of what's the cool haps that you're working on now? Like, what is it that you need from? Is there like community involvement? Like, kind of how's this whole thing being played out?
Since we've arrived at IST, we're really starting to build out the work there, and yeah, we want to make this more of a, we'll say, multi-stakeholder approach to this issue. So I would say look out for more information on how we can build this program together. We're really excited about the work that we're doing. And not only from a technical aspect, but the economics and market incentives, and I'm sure we'll have some different convenings, and so we'll be putting out different calls to action from the community.
Well, and so that's something I hadn't thought about. Are you getting any? Like you mentioned, you had 60 sign up to 300, which I think is considerable, but obviously there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. I don't know. Like there's a lot of security vendors alone, like in the industry, right? Like I'm not even talking about technology people, but like companies that make security products. I mean, just recently, Microsoft is now going to make MFA default, right? It's been around forever, and now they're like, no, it comes out of the box. So are are the adoption, is it, obviously you want it faster, but are you getting any pushback? Are people going, whatever, this is just the next the next insert framework here, we're not worried about it?
There was a lot of really great momentum that we created at CISA, and we're really excited to continue to build on that momentum. To your point about, is this just the next XYZ? What I really am excited about is this idea that we look to other industries and how they became safe, and so that it provides this model. And I'm reminded, as I'm looking at my mug here, the Museum of Flight. We went out there this summer to Seattle, and we went to this museum, and I walked through. It was the aviation pavilion at the Museum of Flight. And it's just, you've got all these airplanes everywhere. You've got 747, you've actually got a Concorde, you've got the first Air Force One, you've got F-14, all kinds of aircraft in this pavilion, right? And so you're kind of just like walking around, you're getting lost. But what you might miss is this exhibit and all these placards that accompany all these airplanes, that it's called the J. Kenneth Higgins Safety by Design exhibit. And so I had taken a bunch of pictures, and I was sending them to Bob Lord, and I was like, oh my God, look at this. and I got especially excited. So my father was a military and a commercial pilot. And so I think about the safety and by design, process basically that not only made flying, an acceptable way of travel, but really one of the safest, right? So it made it safe for him to, to achieve his dream there. But it wasn't by accident, right? It was through concerted effort of studying crashes and studying defects and testing, right? To then understand patterns over different fleets or through different weather systems and things like that to really understand how crashes happen and how to prevent them at scale. Same thing in the automotive industry, right? If we look at the history with Ralph Nader, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, if you look back at the history, say from the 1950s and 60s, when cars were designed for speed and for style, right? And you had to go and buy things to bolt on to make them safer. Sound familiar? You had a lot of these horrific crashes with a lot of deaths and injuries because of the design of the car, right? Not just quote unquote the nut behind the wheel, but it was truly the design of the car that caused a lot of this. And so Ralph Nader, his work really exposed that and exposed the root causes of those crashes. And so he went before Congress and they created this National Highway Transportation Safety Act, created the corresponding agency out of that. And then, over time, they really developed a lot of policies. But what we saw from a safety perspective is this precipitous drop in deaths, despite the exponential rise in vehicle miles traveled, right? Again, that's not by accident. That's not because we became amazing drivers, right? It's not because technology made us better at driving. It's because of the design and because of the way that we really worked from a policy and a manufacturing standpoint at the federal, the state level to make driving safer.
Yeah, that's awesome. That plays right into my analogy I use all the time, where the business is a race car and they're worried about going fast and winning. And absolutely, us as the brakes are important, but they're not thought about until like they're 200 miles an hour going in the corner, you tap it. And you think about the automotive industry, I need this car to look cool. I need somebody to buy it. And I remember seeing a video years ago of like some newer, small, really tiny car getting hit by like one of these big old like 1950s steel vehicles. And you just expect that car to crush it, and it doesn't, because it wasn't manufactured for impact. It was manufactured to look good. And the little car, that was all looking fragile and stuff is destroyed. And I go back to, you didn't have to used to have a degree to be a doctor or a dentist, right? And that those are, and if we look at the age of our industry, how long cybersecurity has actually been a job, it's maybe the 80s, if you want to really be nitpicky about when the first firewalls and stuff came out and people were getting assigned to build it. And again, they weren't designing anything. They were just like, hey, maybe we need to think about this. So I think it's very timely and what's going on, and I'm excited to see what happens. I could talk to you forever about this because it's super interesting. But where can anybody find you on the interweb should they want to, Lauren?
If you go to securityandtechnology.org, that is IST, so the Institute for Security and Technology, that's their website. You can see the whole team there, but specifically Bob, Lord, and me. And we'll be out and about talking with different organizations and crowds and things like that. So please do come say hi if you see us out there.
That's fascinating. Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for enjoying Keyboard Samurai Podcast. If you'd like to engage, find Will on LinkedIn at /WillKlu or visit at willklu.me. That's WILKLU.me for more info. Disconnecting now. Synac you later.